So here's what nobody tells you about finding your person. Sometimes they turn out to be someone completely different than who you thought they were. I'm Brittany, I'm 26, and I thought I had it all figured out when it came to love and relationships. Boy, was I wrong. I met Rowan 2 years ago at this little coffee place near downtown Denver. I was grabbing my usual iced coffee before work, and he was sitting at this corner table with his laptop, looking all focused and serious. Not gonna lie, I thought he was cute in that quiet, mysterious way. He had this whole responsible vibe going on that was different from the guys I usually dated. You know, the ones who still acted like they were in college, even though they were pushing 30. We started talking because I accidentally grabbed his drink order, same thing I always got. Apparently we had the same taste. He was sweet about it, made some joke about great minds thinking alike. We ended up chatting for like 20 minutes about random stuff, and I could tell he was different. He wasn't trying to impress me with some fake persona or talking about how much money he made. He just seemed real. Back then, we were both making pretty much the same amount at our jobs. Nothing crazy, just regular working people trying to make it in an expensive city. And honestly, I loved that we were equals. I'd always been the type to split everything down the middle because I couldn't stand those girls who expected guys to pay for everything. Between us, I used to judge the hell out of women who'd order the most expensive thing on the menu and then conveniently forget their wallet. Like, have some pride, you know? When Rowan and I started dating officially, I made it clear that I wasn't looking for a sugar daddy. I paid for my own drinks, split dinner bills, even insisted on getting separate Ubers sometimes, just to prove I wasn't trying to use him. I thought I was being the perfect girlfriend, independent, fair, not clingy or demanding like other women I knew. He seemed to really appreciate that about me. He'd tell his friends how different I was, how I wasn't like his ex who apparently expected him to fund her entire lifestyle. I loved hearing that. It made me feel special. Like I was doing relationships the right way, while other girls were out there being gold diggers and giving the rest of us a bad name. Those first few months were honestly perfect. We had this easy rhythm where we'd take turns planning dates, split grocery bills when we'd cook together at his place, and I never once made him feel bad about money stuff. We were just two people, building something real together, no games or manipulation or weird power dynamics. Then Rowan went through this rough patch where he got laid off from his job. I'm talking 3 months of unemployment, sending out resumes every day, getting rejection after rejection. And you know what? I was there for him through all of it. I'd buy groceries for both of us, suggest free activities like hiking or checking out those outdoor movie screenings, constantly telling him that something better was coming. Between us, I actually kind of liked being needed that way. It made me feel important and irreplaceable, like I was proving what kind of partner I could be when things got tough. I'd listen to my friends complain about their boyfriends being lazy or unmotivated, and I'd think about how lucky I was to have someone with real potential who just needed support to get back on his feet. When he finally landed this new position, the celebration was incredible. He was so grateful, kept telling me how much my support had meant to him, how he couldn't have gotten through it without me. I felt so validated, like my faith in him had been proven right. We went out to this nice dinner, his treat since he'd just gotten his first paycheck, and everything felt like it was falling into place. For months after that, our relationship felt solid and comfortable. We started talking about maybe moving in together officially, getting a place with better amenities now that we both had stable income again. I'd catch myself browsing apartment listings and imagining how we'd decorate together, maybe get a cat, really build a life as a team. I started thinking about engagement timelines too. Not gonna lie. When my friends would joke about me being next to get married, I'd laugh it off, but secretly hope they were right. I'd pay attention to how Rowan reacted when we'd talk about other couples getting engaged, trying to gauge where his head was at about our future. Everything felt natural and right. We never fought about money. We split household stuff fairly when he'd stay over at my place, and we seemed to want the same things. A stable, loving partnership built on trust and mutual respect. I felt like we were different from all those messy, dramatic couples you see everywhere. The ones who are always fighting about stupid stuff. I thought we were building something real together, something that would last. We'd talk about future plans like they were definitely happening, vacations we wanted to take, how many kids we might want someday, even retirement dreams. It all felt so certain and secure. Between us, I was already mentally planning our wedding. Nothing crazy expensive, just something sweet and meaningful with our closest friends and family. I pictured us writing our own vows, promising to support each other through everything, to be true partners in every sense of the word. I really thought we were on the same page about what marriage meant. Two people choosing to build a life together, sharing everything, being there for each other no matter what. I thought we both understood that real love meant complete trust and commitment. Looking back, maybe I should have paid more attention to some of the things he'd say about his friends' relationships, or how he'd react when we'd hear about people getting divorced. But honestly, I was just so happy to have found someone who seemed to want the same kind of partnership I did. I genuinely believed we were different from other couples, that we had something special that would last forever. I thought our foundation was stronger because we'd been through tough times together and come out even closer. I was so sure about our future that I'd already started thinking about how I'd want to combine our finances after marriage, maybe start saving for a house together. Everything felt perfect and right and exactly like love was supposed to feel. Which is probably why what happened next hit me so hard. I never saw it coming. Everything started to shift about 6 months ago when Rowan got this huge promotion at work. I'm talking serious money, like more than double what he was making before. At first, I was so excited for him, for us really, because I figured this meant we could finally start planning some of those bigger life goals we'd been talking about. But then, things got weird with our usual routine. He'd suggest restaurants that I knew would cost me like a week's worth of grocery money, or want to upgrade our weekend plans to things that would seriously stretch my budget. I found myself having to decline or suggest cheaper alternatives, and I could see him getting frustrated with the limitations. Between us, I started feeling like the broke girlfriend holding him back from enjoying his success. And I hated that feeling. When we'd go out to eat, I'd spend the whole time calculating how much my half of the bill would set me back instead of actually enjoying the meal. It was embarrassing and stressful and not fun at all. So when he started offering to pay for more stuff, I eventually stopped refusing. At first, I felt guilty about it. But honestly, it was such a relief to not have to worry about whether I could afford to keep up with his new lifestyle. And he seemed to like being able to treat me, you know? He'd get this proud look when he'd pick up the dinner tab or suggest weekend trips without asking me to split the cost. I convinced myself this was just how relationships naturally evolved when one person started making significantly more money. It made logical sense. The person with more resources should contribute more. That's just basic fairness, right? My friends seemed to think it was totally normal, too. When I'd mention feeling weird about Rowan paying for more things, they'd roll their eyes and tell me to enjoy it. That's what boyfriends are for, my friend would say. And honestly, part of me agreed. I'd grown up watching my mom struggle financially after my dad left, so there was something really comforting about being with someone who had the resources to handle things. But then Rowan started making these comments about our future and building wealth together. That made me uncomfortable. He'd talk about investment strategies and retirement planning like we were already married. I'd nod along because I didn't want to seem unsupportive, but internally I felt like he was moving way too fast with all the financial planning stuff. It felt premature to be making those kinds of decisions when we weren't even engaged yet. Like, slow down there, buddy, we're still just dating. When he'd bring up things like credit scores and debt-to-income ratios, I'd try to change the subject because it felt too serious and businesslike for where we were in our relationship. I wanted romance and love and partnership, not financial planning meetings. The whole dynamic started feeling less like we were building a life together and more like he was trying to manage my financial future, which honestly rubbed me the wrong way. Between us, I'd never asked him to take care of me financially. I had my own job, my own goals, my own money. I didn't want him thinking I was with him for his paycheck. But at the same time, I'd gotten used to the nicer dinners and not having to stress about splitting every little expense down to the penny. It was confusing because I appreciated his generosity, but started to resent what felt like strings attached to it. Like, he'd pay for dinner and then later make some comment about our money or our financial future. And I'd think, wait, when did my money become our money just because you paid for Thai food? I started noticing he'd bring up financial stuff at weird times too. We'd be having a perfectly normal conversation about something random, and he'd somehow steer it back to money management or investment opportunities. It was like he'd become obsessed with wealth building now that he actually had some wealth to build. The worst part was how he'd talk about it like we were a team making these decisions together, but he'd never actually ask my opinion about anything. He'd just assume I'd want to do whatever made the most financial sense. Like, I didn't have my own thoughts about how I wanted to handle my future. Between us, I started to feel like he saw me as some kind of financial project instead of his girlfriend. Like he was trying to optimize our relationship for maximum wealth accumulation, or something equally unromantic. I tried to tell myself he was just being practical, that having financial security was important for couples. But something about the way he approached it felt off to me. It was too calculated, too focused on protecting and growing assets instead of just living our lives and enjoying what we had. I missed the simplicity of when we made the same amount of money and everything was just naturally equal. Back then, our relationship felt pure and uncomplicated. Now it felt like there were all these unspoken expectations and assumptions about money that I'd never agreed to. The whole thing was starting to make me question whether we actually wanted the same things from a relationship, or if his priorities had changed now that he had money to worry about protecting. The conversation that changed everything happened on a Tuesday night in March. We were sitting on his couch talking about maybe officially moving in together, looking at apartments with better amenities now that his income had increased so much. I was excited, thinking about having a pool and maybe in-unit laundry, finally living somewhere that felt more grown-up. But then he started talking about lease agreements and who would be responsible for what expenses. And the conversation took this weird turn into property ownership and asset protection. I should have seen it coming based on all his recent financial obsession. But I was still caught completely off guard when he said the words that made my stomach drop. We should probably talk about a prenup for when we get married. I felt like he'd just slapped me across the face. Here I was, thinking about our future together, planning our shared life, and he was already thinking about protecting himself from me. Like, what the hell? I asked him why he'd even bring that up, and he started going into this whole explanation about divorce statistics, and how he'd seen his friends get taken advantage of in their breakups. He kept saying it wasn't personal, that it was just smart financial planning. But how could it not be personal? He was literally planning for our relationship to fail before we were even engaged. Between us, I couldn't believe this was the same guy who used to tell me how different I was from other women, how much he trusted me, how lucky he felt to have found someone genuine. Now he was treating me like every other potential gold digger who might try to steal his precious money. I told him that wasn't how I saw marriage, as some business transaction that needed legal protection. I'd always believed that when you truly love someone, you trust them completely. You don't marry someone you think might try to screw you over financially. He kept talking about being in a vulnerable position now that he made more money, and I wanted to scream. Vulnerable? To me? The person who'd supported him through 3 months of unemployment, who'd never once made him feel bad about money, who'd proven over and over that I wasn't with him for financial reasons? The more he talked, the more insulted I felt. I'd been there when he had nothing, encouraging him, believing him, never judging him for his situation. Now that the tables were turned, and he was successful, he wanted legal protection from the very person who'd helped him get there. I explained that I'd never even thought about his money as something I was entitled to. I had my own career, my own goals. I wasn't looking for someone to take care of me financially. But apparently, none of that mattered because he kept going on about statistics and protecting what he'd worked for. Between us, I felt like he was saying he didn't really know me at all. Or worse, that deep down, he thought I was just like every other woman who might go after his assets in a divorce. After 2 years together, after everything we'd been through, he still saw me as a potential threat to his financial security. I told him that if he wanted to protect his assets from me, then maybe we should just keep everything separate and forget about marriage entirely. Why complicate things with wedding vows if he needed a legal contract to feel safe combining his life with mine? The conversation got more and more heated because he kept insisting it wasn't about trust, but I couldn't see it any other way. If you trust someone completely, you don't need a prenup. If you need a prenup, you don't trust them. It seemed pretty simple to me. He started bringing up all these examples of people we knew who'd gotten divorced and how messy it had been financially. But those weren't us. Those couples had obvious problems, communication issues, fundamental incompatibilities. We were different. We were solid. Or at least I thought we were solid, until he basically told me he wanted an escape hatch built into our marriage before it even started. The whole thing left me feeling like I didn't know him anymore. This wasn't the man I'd fallen in love with. The one who used to talk about trust and partnership and building something real together. This was someone who'd let money and fear turn him into a suspicious, calculating person I barely recognized. I couldn't let it go after that conversation. Every single interaction with Rowan felt different, tainted by what he'd said about needing a prenup. When he'd pay for dinner, I'd wonder if he was calculating it as money he might need to protect for me later. When he'd talk about work or his success, I'd hear it as him bragging about assets I'd apparently never have access to. The whole foundation of our relationship felt poisoned. I kept bringing up the prenup thing, hoping he'd realize how hurtful and insulting his suggestion had been and just take it back. But instead of backing down, he seemed to double down on his position. He'd send me articles about financial planning for couples, or tell me stories from his coworkers about messy divorces, like he was building some kind of case for why we needed legal protection from each other. Between us, I wanted to scream that I wasn't those other women, that I'd already proven my character by sticking with him through his worst times. I decided to test him, to see if he'd choose me over his paranoia about protecting his money. I started making comments about how I couldn't marry someone who saw me as a potential financial threat. I'd bring up friends of ours who'd gotten married without prenups. Couples who trusted each other completely and weren't afraid to legally bind their lives together. I wanted him to realize that asking for a prenup was basically asking me to accept that he saw our marriage as likely to fail, that he was already planning his exit strategy before we'd even walked down the aisle. But he wouldn't budge. Every time I brought it up, he'd give me the same speech about being practical and responsible, about protecting what he'd worked hard to build. Like I was some kind of threat to his precious financial security instead of the woman who'd supported him when he had nothing. I started getting more direct about how his attitude was affecting me. I told him that his insistence on a prenup proved he didn't love me the way I loved him. If he really loved me, he'd want to share everything with me, build a life where we were true partners in every sense. I accused him of being influenced by toxic ideas about women and money, probably from his bitter divorced friends who'd poisoned his mind against marriage. I pointed out how I'd never once asked him for anything expensive, never made him feel like I was with him for his money. I'd proven over 2 years that I was different. Between us, I felt like he was punishing me for other women's behavior, treating me like a criminal because of what strangers had done in their failed relationships. The arguments became more frequent and intense. I'd find myself saying things specifically designed to hurt him, reminding him how I'd supported him during his unemployment, how I'd been there taking care of him when he needed it most. Now that he was successful, he wanted to make sure I could never claim any benefit from the life we'd built together. I started making ultimatums, telling him that if he couldn't trust me enough to marry me without a prenup, then maybe we weren't right for each other. I was hoping he'd realize what he was about to lose and choose our love over his financial paranoia. Instead, he started getting more distant and less willing to engage when I brought up the prenup issue. He'd shut down the conversation, saying we were going in circles and needed to agree to disagree. But how do you agree to disagree about something so fundamental to how you see marriage and partnership? I felt like he was being stubborn and selfish, prioritizing his money over our relationship. Between us, I started wondering if he'd only been with me in the beginning because I was low maintenance and didn't cost him much. Now that he had real money, maybe he was looking for ways to keep it away from me. The more I thought about it, the more betrayed I felt. I'd invested 2 years in this relationship, supported him through his worst times, proven my loyalty and character over and over. And his response was to ask me to sign a legal document limiting my rights in our future marriage. It felt like he was saying that despite everything we'd been through together, he still didn't really trust me. That deep down, he thought I might be the type of person who would try to take advantage of him financially. That hurt more than I can even explain. After everything, he still saw me as a potential threat instead of his partner. The final explosion happened about 3 weeks later when Rowan came home from work and said he wanted to have what he called a calm, productive discussion about finding a compromise on the prenup situation. He'd apparently spent his free time researching different types of agreements and wanted to present options that might make me more comfortable with the idea. He started explaining sunset clauses and partial asset protection like he was giving me some kind of business presentation about our future marriage. I sat there listening to him talk about our relationship like it was a corporate merger, and something inside me just completely snapped. I told him I couldn't believe he'd spent weeks figuring out more creative ways to protect himself from me, instead of reconsidering whether he should marry someone he felt he needed protection from in the first place. The whole thing was so insulting and backwards. I asked him point blank, "Do you think I'm the type of person who would try to take advantage of you financially?" When he hesitated before answering, I knew I had everything I needed to know. That pause told me everything. Deep down, he wasn't completely sure he could trust me, and that uncertainty was enough for him to want legal safeguards. Between us, his hesitation hurt worse than if he'd just said yes outright. At least then I'd know where I stood. But that pause meant he was torn, which somehow felt worse. I told him that hesitation proved we shouldn't get married at all. If he had any doubts about my character or my motivations after 2 years together, then he wasn't ready for the kind of partnership I wanted. Marriage was supposed to be about 2 people becoming one unit, sharing everything including financial responsibility and benefits. The whole point of marriage is trusting someone enough to legally bind your lives together completely. Asking for a prenup is like asking for a legal escape hatch. And I wasn't interested in marrying someone who was already planning potential exit strategies. I explained that I'd rather be single forever than married to someone who thought I might screw him over financially. If that's what he thought of me after everything we'd been through, then he didn't deserve me at all. The conversation got really heated when he accused me of being unrealistic about divorce statistics and said I was being too emotional instead of practical. That word, emotional, absolutely set me off. Of course, I was emotional about the person I loved treating me like a potential con artist. I told him that if he wanted to be practical, then the most practical thing would be for us to break up, since he clearly wasn't ready for real marriage. I accused him of letting his money and his fear change who he was, turning him from the trusting partner I'd fallen in love with into someone suspicious and calculating. Between us, I felt like his success had revealed his true character, and apparently I didn't fit into the life he wanted now that he had money to protect. I told him I felt like I didn't even know him anymore. The man I'd supported through unemployment would never have treated me this way, but he kept arguing that he was the same person, just being smart about protecting what he'd worked for. Like I was some external threat instead of his partner who'd helped him get where he was. When I brought up how I'd supported us both when he had nothing, how I'd believed in his potential when he was sending out resumes every day, he got defensive and said that didn't mean I was entitled to half his assets if we got divorced. Entitled? I'd never said anything about being entitled to his money. I just wanted him to trust me enough not to need legal protection from me. There's a huge difference between wanting to share a life with someone and wanting to take their money. The fight ended with me giving him an ultimatum: no prenup or no wedding and no more relationship. I told him he needed to decide whether he loved me enough to trust me completely, or whether he was too scared and paranoid to be in a real marriage. I figured that would wake him up, make him realize what he was about to lose over his obsession with protecting his assets. I thought he'd choose me. I was wrong. 2 days after my ultimatum, Rowan asked me to meet him at that same coffee shop where we'd first met. I thought he was going to apologize and tell me he'd realized love was more important than protecting his money. I was already planning how gracious I'd be when he admitted he'd been wrong. Instead, he told me he'd been thinking about everything I'd said, and he'd come to realize that we wanted fundamentally different things from marriage. He said he couldn't marry someone who saw financial planning and asset protection as a betrayal of love, rather than a responsible part of building a life together. I sat there in complete shock, as he essentially broke up with me over my refusal to sign away my rights in our future marriage. He explained that my reaction to the prenup conversation had shown him we weren't as compatible as he'd thought. That we had different values when it came to practical relationship decisions. Between us, I could tell he'd been planning this whole speech. He seemed calm and resolved in a way that actually scared me, like he'd already made peace with losing me over this issue. I told him he was making a huge mistake, that he was choosing money over love, over 2 years of building something real together. But he just shook his head and said that wasn't how he saw it. He said he was choosing a partner who shared his values about responsibility and planning for the future. Like I was irresponsible for wanting to marry someone without needing legal protection from them. The whole conversation felt surreal. Within a month, Rowan had taken a job in Chicago and moved away completely. I found out through our mutual friends that he'd started dating someone new almost immediately. Some lawyer who apparently thought prenups were a great idea and had actually suggested they get one. The news hit me like I'd been punched in the stomach. He'd replaced me with someone who shared his paranoid views about marriage and asset protection. Someone who was apparently everything I wasn't. Practical, legally minded, and thrilled to sign contracts limiting her rights in their relationship. I heard through the grapevine that they were already living together and talking about getting engaged after only a few months of dating. Meanwhile, I was still trying to process how 2 years of my life had just disappeared because I wouldn't agree to be treated like a business risk. Between us, I tried reaching out to him a few times, suggesting we could talk about compromise, that maybe I'd been too rigid in my thinking. But he never responded to any of my messages. It was like I'd never existed, like our entire relationship had been erased the moment I didn't give him what he wanted. Through social media, because of course I stalked his profiles like a crazy person, I watched him build this whole new life with someone else. They went on expensive vacations, attended fancy work events together, and looked like the kind of successful power couple I'd never been able to be with him. The worst part was seeing how happy he looked. He seemed more confident and settled than I'd ever seen him with me. Like he'd finally found exactly what he was looking for, which apparently wasn't me. I realized his promotion and new money hadn't changed him at all. It had just revealed who he really was underneath. And apparently, I wasn't the type of person who fit into that version of his life. I ended up having to move back in with my mom because I couldn't afford my apartment on just my income. My friends tried to be supportive, but I could tell some of them thought I'd made a mistake by being so stubborn about the prenup. A few even said I should have just signed it if I really loved him. But I still believed I'd been right. You don't marry someone you need legal protection from. If you can't trust your partner completely, then you shouldn't be getting married in the first place. A year later, I found out through Facebook that Rowan had gotten engaged to the lawyer. The announcement showed off this massive diamond ring and mentioned their upcoming wedding at some expensive resort. I stared at the photos of him looking happier than I'd ever seen him, with a woman who was everything I apparently wasn't. Between us, I felt like I'd been thrown away for not being willing to accept less than what I believed I deserved from marriage. The whole thing still felt like a betrayal of everything I thought love was supposed to be about. But watching him succeed and thrive with someone else, seeing how perfectly his new girlfriend fit into his life and his values, made me wonder if maybe I'd been the one who didn't understand what modern relationships actually required. Maybe I'd been naive to think that love and trust were enough. Maybe everyone else was right that marriage was partly a business arrangement, and I'd been too romantic and idealistic to accept that reality. Still, even now, I can't imagine signing a prenup. It would feel like admitting that the person I was marrying might try to hurt me financially, and if I believed that was possible, why would I want to marry them at all? I guess Rowan found someone who didn't have those hang-ups, someone who could separate the romantic part of marriage from the practical legal aspects. Someone who was apparently a better match for the successful, financially focused person he'd become. Between us, I'm not sure I'll ever understand how you can claim to love someone while simultaneously planning for the possibility that they might screw you over. But clearly, I'm in the minority on that opinion. Maybe someday I'll meet someone who feels the same way I do about trust in marriage. Or maybe I'll end up alone because I'm too stubborn to compromise on something that feels fundamental to how I see love and partnership. Either way, I still think Rowan made the wrong choice. He gave up something real for financial security and legal protection. But obviously, his new life is working out just fine without me in it.